Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Captive Audience. It's a wonderful Wednesday. And tonight we have your host, Don Anderson, along with Sonny Danforth, who used to seeing these two happy faces, but we're going to add my son, Reggie Anderson. Say hello, Reggie.
Hey there, everybody.
It's so nice to
And
have you, Reggie, here, and it's nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
so,
Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited.
so we thought
We
it'd
are
be great to add Reggie to this periodically because, yeah, this gives us an opportunity to hear from the next generation. I'm going to guess the average age of our captive audience and running this risk is probably somewhere in that 45 to 70 range. And we probably don't have a lot of people who are younger than that. But if we do, it'd be nice to get some folks, get the perspective of some folks that are younger as well to kind of expand the audience. So Reggie, welcome aboard. You're the first of hopefully many more. All right. So I thought I'd kick this off with kind of the first topic, and the most exciting thing going on right now is, of course, the completely predictable attack of Israel on Iran. And I just have to speak just real quick from a historic perspective. I remember this, and I'm sure you do too, Sonny. I remember this exact thing happening back in '86. I was in the Air Force at the time, and we're watching Iran do this buildup, and I'm thinking to myself, "There's no way they're not. They have to do it." At that point, it was a nuclear reactor that they had. And those of you who are old enough to remember, all of a sudden, the one morning you woke up, the Israeli Air Force struck that thing, hit it perfectly. I think there was only one civilian that got killed in the whole thing. A perfect strike, which they have a tendency to do. And I'll never forget there was a discussion between the Secretary of State at the time. I can't remember who it was. Informed Reagan that this had happened, and Reagan's response was, "They did what?" And then he said, "Boys will be boys." But his history is like deja vu all over again. No surprise under the sun. They virtually pretty much had to do this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to see all these things happen at the same time. I mean, is it just the '80s over again? You got Israel attacking Iran. You got Koreatown. You got the Koreans defending themselves in the riots in Los Angeles. It's just everything is new and old at the same time. So it's interesting to see it happen in real time. And I agree. I think it's something that Israel it was bound to happen at some point.
Yeah, I think so too. It is, uh, as I've said before, Israel is doing the world a favor. This needed to happen because we have Iran with all their proxies have been very much the bullies and causing a lot of mayhem, not just for America, not just for Israel, but for other nations as well. And I believe their nuclear threat, has to be eliminated.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing. Listen, even listen to some conservatives, and I understand the sentiment that that maybe they shouldn't do it. Maybe we should negotiate longer. Maybe we should wait. But you realize that there's no more time left to negotiate. They're within weeks of being able to develop a weapon and the capability to toss it, not just to Israel, by the way, because they'd just be the first target. Remember, the great Satan, the little Satan is Israel. The great Satan is the United States. So it's only a matter of time before they spread those weapons to the Houthis and everybody else that they've been, because they've been arming the terrorist world for the last 40 years. So really, Israel is doing something that if they weren't here, we would have to do anyway. It was something that had to be done. And it just amazes me that there are those who don't just see that. If you allow them to get a nuclear weapon, the whole world's in trouble. Is it any surprise, for example, none of the Arab neighbors are condemning this, by the way, because they know that they'd be in a whole lot of trouble too.
You're absolutely right. And I read a report yesterday that Saudi Arabia is supporting Israel in this as well, like with some air cover and things. And they're not just sitting on the sidelines. And it needs to happen because you can't just look at the size of Israel. It's just like David and Goliath, to Iran.
Mhm. Yeah, Iran is like twice the size of Texas. It's a pretty good sized country, and Israel's like it takes a missile, what, 30 minutes, I think, to get to Israel. They don't have warning time like we would have.
Yeah.
They had to do it. They had to act. They couldn't wait anymore. And the other side of this too is you realize, look at the pains they've taken to avoid killing civilians. They placed these things in concentrated civilian areas on purpose. And somehow, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's very small, the number of civilians that they've hit. Look at the pains Israel's taken to do that. And you look at the Iranian response. What do? They bomb populated areas.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, going back to your point, Sonny, about the Iranians, Iran's neighbors also being on the side of Israel. We saw Jordan, their Air Force shooting down missiles defending Israel, and from an outside perspective, a lot of people might be, well, I thought Jordan wasn't with Israel. Well, it might be one of those enemy of my enemy type situations. I don't think anybody in the Middle East wants Iran to have nuclear weapons, least of all Israel, but none of their neighbors are particularly fond of that either.
No, they aren't. No, they aren't. I did post a story from the Epoch Times about the ambassador is, who's Mike Huckabee, is letting people know to evacuate all of the, any Americans that are there to evacuate. And, they're looking at doing some in this article, a cruise ship or flights, but they, the people have to be signed up for a urgent notice. Citizens that are there, there's a way to be signed up. I'm trying to find that in the article, but anyhow, they have to be, and there's been a level 4 do not travel advisory there actually for quite a while. So, I pray, but anybody who works for the government is asked to shelter in place, and their families to shelter in place. But if they need to leave, they're working to get some air flight and or cruise ship of people. And the border, it said in that article that the border to Jordan was still open.
Well, I'll tell you the interesting thing about this too, and you might have heard, I think it was the president of France, Macron, put his foot in his mouth and said Trump was leaving the G7 meeting in order to talk about having a ceasefire. No, it's not going to be a ceasefire. A ceasefire is the last thing you want. That just leaves the powers in play to keep doing what they're doing. They had their chance. I mean, they were given notice by Trump and Israel 60 days. Now, the 61st day, we saw what happened.
Yeah.
So no one can say they weren't given adequate warning. And I think perhaps, I think this is the interesting part, because right now they're discussing whether they're going with the Moab, the mother of all bombs. And the only folks that have a Moab, of course, is the United States, which would implicate us in having a direct participation in this thing. I think one of the things that could possibly happen here is we get them to do unconditional surrender, which has to happen. Yeah. Then we get in on the ground and we dismantle it. And then you avoid having to do the whole Moab routine. That's still on the table, and it certainly should be. And hopefully we don't have to do that. But that really depends on how the Iranian mullahs play their cards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with, it's so, my heart goes out to the Israelis, actually, even the Iranians, because this is not against the Iranian people. This is against the regime. And nuclear, having the capability of nuclear weapons. But Israel is targeting military. They're targeting, specific places, and where Iran is targeting, they're just shooting stuff into civilians, and they're not hitting it's not a military versus military. And that's really sad. It shows who they are.
Yeah. That's precisely right. And it shows that, and in the Iranian people, we can't get in the business of nation building. There's one thing we've learned is that don't do that. But heck, it was us and our CIA that caused this problem in the first place. If you go back to the whole late 70s issue and the hostage routine that was caused by the Carter administration of the State Department trying to remove, I think it was Pahlavi, who, interestingly enough, I'm pretty sure it's his son or grandson, who is in exile, who might be the person that comes back. But the Ayatollah Khomeini and the rest of them all got into power because of us and our meddling in foreign affairs. So we created the 40-year disaster, another legacy of the Carter administration and Democrats, surprise,
Yeah,
that we got to fix. That we got to fix.
100%.
So history is once again an amazing thing. Um, but one other thing I thought we should touch on real quick, and that's the big beautiful bill, because I don't think there's been a lot of information in terms of like what exactly is in it. And so I just looked up a couple of things that I thought that we should all be really encouraged about what precisely is in it. And I should have gotten a more lengthy thing on it, but here's just a few of the things. And it's pretty exciting stuff. So first of all, it's going to reduce the budget deficit by 2.8 trillion right off the bat. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Also,
And the cool thing about this, this information I'm about to share with you is it comes from the CBO, which is run by Democrats basically. So 3.5% tax on remittances sent home by migrants. Now that might not sound like very much on the surface, but think about the numbers. And this applies to HB1 visa holders as well. So 28 billion goes to Mexico. Now this is not the trade imbalance. This is just the amount that they send home. They come here, suck up the welfare, suck up the medical stuff, suck up the school system, and then send 28 billion with a B home. 15 billion goes to China, 10 billion to India, 10 billion to the Philippines, 5.5 billion to Nigeria. This is just money that folks from those countries come here, work, mooch on us, and then send back home. And there's no tax on it. So Trump is talking about taxing it only 3.5%. And this is the hilarious part. The president of Mexico, I think it's Steinbaum, I think it's how she pronounces it, how she winds up being president of Mexico, I'm not sure, but she does. And she is angry and at Trump, the United States, for tax. Basically, we're sending money to your country and you're mad because we're going to tax it. So I think what could possibly happen here is Trump says, well, fine, if you're going to interfere with our elections, because she's advocating that the folks in LA riot in the streets because we're thinking about taxing these remittances. Well, why don't we just triple that and make it like 15%, which I think it should be 15 to 20% anyway. So, so she put her foot right in her mouth, and let's see what happens with that. But I think that's really interesting stuff.
well,
So
I read that Mexico taxes it on the receiving end.
wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
let's
I
see.
did
She
not
wants
know
to
that.
get mad at us for wanting to tax it on the exit end? No. You can't have your cake and eat it too, you know.
Yeah, if anything, 3.5 is too low. I mean, well, first of all, 3.5 is more than zero, so it's better than nothing. But yeah, if they're coming here and you calculate all, like you're saying, all of the welfare, all of the infrastructure, all of the parts that we're paying for, and then all we get back from it is 3.5% on our side, while Mexico's taxing, I think it was something around like 6 or 7%. How is that balanced at all? And that 28 billion is just the amount that we know about. That's probably close to equal of that that's not being collected at all or being tracked at all. So absolutely. If anything, just ramp it up a little more.
Yeah, and it's a release valve for them. So they don't have to fix their government, deal with their problems. They just run across the border and mooch on us, and that allows that government to keep festering, being a terrible government. If those people were forced to stay home and deal with their own government, they'd be more likely to fix it. So we're not helping them by doing that. And then the other thing that this is essentially it's a progressive tax it's a regressive tax against the poor, because who are the people who are being deprived of those services? Who are the people who wind up waiting in line because they can't get to a doctor? Who are the people who can't getting Medicare or Medicaid? Who are the people whose schools are completely hosed? Because people who are middle class and above, they just move to another neighborhood. They just leave that problem. So the people who are left to deal with this are, let's face it, the poor whites and the brown and black among us. Those are the ones who suffer most from this. And these are the ones who, for that if there's no other reason, should be voting for Trump, because the Democrat Party is hosing them. And this is yet another way how they're doing that.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning the ways, and that tax too. It would encourage them to go back on their own, which is the other thing. You want to put financial incentives in place so that people leave on their own rather than having to have ICE come get them. If ICE has to come get them, great. But if we can incentivize them, or
Yes.
disincentivize them such that it makes better sense to be home than it does to be here, then they leave on their own. And I know there's already things in place to do that. I think there's rewards for them doing it. They're paying for them to travel back. If you voluntarily do it, those things are there. But we need to ratchet up the pressure. And I really think 3.5% is too low personally. When I heard this, I'm like, why isn't that 25%?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, ultimately, we want Mexico to be successful on its own. Right now it's run by a cartel mob, and their government is essentially a farce at this point. And it's been like that ever since we've allowed ourselves to be the outlet valve, as you said, allowing the successful and the ones who are entrepreneurs on their side coming over here, and having successful lives over here, which is great on an individual level. But then what's left to the country left behind? And so I think, if anything, if this is going to incentivize people either to go back or invest more in their home country, it's only going to be a success on both sides.
Oh, it kind of makes me. I'm just kind of thinking here about you hear that Christian argument to send your Christian kid into the public school, and they'll be the light and improve what happens in the school. And we all know what happens. No, that kid gets destroyed, and it's kind of a similar thing that you see here. So there's citizens, if you will, come here, and then they burn down the institutions that make this country great. And it's not their fault, but it's just that you can't have too many of them. And this just makes it. I know, segueing a little bit into what happened in Minnesota with the assassination of that lawmaker. The first thing I thought when I heard that was, man, that's how life is in countries like Mexico. This woman speaks her mind. She's the only Democrat. She votes against what I think the vote was for free health care for illegals. Now, talk about how basic is that? But she was the only Democrat who voted against it, and they assassinated the woman. I mean, I'm not talking about threatened her. I'm not talking about picketing her house. They killed the woman and her husband because they didn't vote a certain way. That's why the government is so destroyed in places like Mexico. Because first of all, A, who would want to go into public life knowing you're going to deal with that kind of stuff? And B, if you are in public life, this is a threat you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And the only way to make it in public life is you're not representing the people. You're either representing a cartel or representing your pocketbook.
Usually both. When you're down there, it kind of goes hand in hand. How can you?
If you want to live.
Yeah, how can you be a good civil servant if you are basically just deciding, okay, am I just going to put myself, my family at risk today? There's those few who are willing to do that, but that's few and far between.
And that makes me circle back to the thought, and Reggie and I were talking earlier, and Sonny, we've talked about this before too. Everything rests on Benjamin Franklin's, it's John Adams' observation that a constitutional republic can't survive unless it's a religious or moral people. You can have all the laws you want, but if you have people that are willing to do what we just saw happen in Minnesota, and if we have too many of them, then this structure cannot survive. So it's as great as it is to have free market capitalism, as great as it is to have a constitutional republic. If that's not supported by a foundational moral system, the whole thing will collapse. And I think that is a perfect example of it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go a little bit different on a little bit different. You're absolutely right in what you say. But with all of the illegals that are in our country from so many countries, it has actually lowered the wages in America. And I read yesterday about a meat packing plant somewhere that I guess an immigration ICE went in there and pulled all the illegals out of this place. And the next day they had their office was full of Americans filling out applications, and so, illegals come here for, I tell you, having traveled a lot, and I know you have too, I don't begrudge somebody trying to have a better life, but you come through the front door and not the back door. You'd come through legally, and but they are causing our wages to actually stay lower, and Americans not to have jobs, our citizens not to have jobs.
Yeah.
Sad as it is.
And I mean, that gets at the heart of ultimately what, I mean, any government's goal should be, which is to, promote the good and the right and the valuable for its own citizens. We can't be responsible for every nation on earth, every otherwise, why have nations in the first place? It's nice from a position of privilege, here as at the best country in the world, but how did it get to be at that point? It's not going to remain that point forever if you just keep letting anybody and everybody in. There was a great, if you haven't watched yet, there was an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger on The View of all places, and they asked him a very a very hot button question, clearly targeted at trying to get a response out of what's going on in Los Angeles right now. And his response is essentially, as an immigrant himself, nowhere else on earth could he have been afforded this opportunity, but as an immigrant, you are a guest. And when you're a guest at someone's home, you're polite, you are overly generous, you do everything you can to be a good guest. If you're not a good guest, you get thrown out. And that's what we're seeing right now. If you're sneaking in through the back door, you're already setting a bad example right off the bat. You can't be a good guest if you're breaking the first rule, which is sneaking into someone's house.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other thing this causes a bifurcation in the classes. Let me explain that a little bit. So one of the things that has made America such a unique and such a phenomenal country over the past 225 years is we have a middle class. So you don't have extreme rich and you don't have extreme poor, and you see that in the vast majority of these countries. You'll have a tiny fraction that gets like just a fortune, and then like nobody in the middle, and everybody else is in like destitute squalor. Well, the reason this country's been so successful is pretty much everyone from birth has an opportunity to have a decent middle class lifestyle. That's not the same as saying everybody gets the same thing. You're never going to get the same thing because everybody has different interests, different work ethic, different intelligence, different all of that stuff. So I'm not making that case. What I'm saying is you have a shot to have a decent middle class lifestyle, meaning you can own a house, you can get a great job, you can raise your kids, and you can have a great life in the United States. But what this illegal immigration is doing is it's destroying the manufacturing base, and it's destroying that first rung on the socioeconomic climb that the poor can have. So again, the upper classes and those with the college degrees and all this kind of stuff, it's not hurting them. In fact, it's making their life better. They can get like cheap labor and have people cut their grass and pick their lettuce. And what blows my mind is these liberals will actually say that and not realize how racist that sounds. Well, who's going to pick our lettuce? What in the world did you just say? But they'll say it without even thinking. But the point is those manufacturing jobs, once upon a time, back in the 70s and 80s, you could get a job at the assembly line on General Motors at a timber plant, in like Springfield, Oregon, and you can make 80, 100, in today's dollar, 80, 100 grand a year, and you'd be doing great. What these people have done with this is they cut the legs off from under those kinds of jobs by undercutting it, by paying these illegals subpar wages. And so now, and again, the poor whites, minorities in inner cities, can't get that first rung on the ladder, can't get that first job. They wind up on the dole, unemployed, and their lives are miserable. So these people come to our country, get those jobs, and then got the audacity to send the money back home on top of that. It's like, that's got to change. And if there's lots of things I like about what Trump's doing. Man, I got to tell you, this might be in the top 2 or 3, bringing those middle class gigs back home.
Yeah, COVID wiped out the middle class. Badly. How many people lost their businesses? I can think of many friends that I know that lost their businesses. But I'll tell you who's going to pick the lettuce. Those that come here as contract workers from Central America or South, and Mexico. That's who, the very same people we already have and more. I live in such an agricultural area, and I know that we have them. Because the farmer has to plan ahead. Who's going to be picking my crop and make a plan ahead? They're not going to just go drive on the street and go, "Oh yeah, you want a job here? Come on, jump in the car." That's the day labor person. That is not what the farmer's doing. They got to plan how to get this crop off the field or out of the tree or whatever it is.
And this argument about the price of things they're going to pay is going to go up. I think that's a bunch of baloney. And to the degree that it does go up, like everything else in life, it balances out. You start making decisions around what you really need to have, and so and free market economics will take care of that. It always has. The adjustments we've made, things aren't in a vacuum, if you will.
Yeah, well, and it follows the Democrat mantra. It tracks very closely. Now it's, who's going to pick the crops? The famous Kelly Osbourne clip. Oh, Mr. Trump, who's going to clean your toilet? Obviously, their racism shows right through into that. 1850s, who's going to pick the crops? It's the same thing over and over again about, they have an in for the system. They, the sleight of hand of, look over here, who's going to fill this particular insert job here, when really it's all about, how are we going to get votes? How can we destroy the voter base? How can we destroy and rig everything around the voting system? That's what it's about. They'll just spout these things that espouse, equality or opportunity, but we all know that's not the real goal of it.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is the people see through it. It might take them a while to see through it, but the polling data is showing that they do. So I just thought I'd quickly segue into that because the polling data is fantastic. And the cool thing is these are CNN polls on top of that. So CNN poll found out 40% of American adults believe Republicans have strong leadership versus only 16% said that about Democrats. That is like incredible. Only 19% said Democrats can get things done. That is astronomical. And they were thinking they were going to get a bump from having these illegals here. But what they didn't see was that the immigrants who come here legally are looking at and thinking, we don't want any parts of that because we had to jump through the hoops and do this the right way. And now these people are coming in. And on top of that, they're going into their neighborhoods. Remember, if you're Hispanic, you immigrated here recently and you immigrated correctly, these people are coming into your neighborhoods and destroying your schools, your medical system, your criminal justice system. And on top of that, making you look bad on top of that, because now people look at you like you're the one out there doing those crimes. So what's happening is those people, the needle has moved from, I think it's moved 40 percentage points towards Republicans. It was 32% plus for Democrats. Now it's 8% plus for Republicans for Hispanics. That is historic. And to do it in only a 4-year time period is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, a lot of people made money in Trump's first term. I mean, I heard that. I saw the interviews, and people said, "Oh yeah, we were making money and more than they had before in so many demographics." So they want it again. There's nothing wrong with prospering and having law and order. That's what we all want. We just want to get along with our life and have a good life, work hard, and be productive in society, and not the mayhem that we're getting right at the moment.
Yeah.
In some areas.
Yeah. Well, and coming out of the last, disaster of 4 years, the really clear picture between the two is, I think, contrasted more than it's ever been. And if anything, the last election showed us that. Another piece is that, the left's view of how the certain demographics are just a homogenous. They'll vote a certain way. They'll do a certain thing. Clearly, that got turned on its head very quickly. And these polls are showing that, and the gap is only growing bigger between who is a viable candidate on the Republican side, and then who is there left on the Democrat side. There's one candidate. Just name one candidate.
And the reason for that is there's no issue. I mean, they keep trying to do things to make themselves appeal to this group and appeal to that group. Like the latest thing is, how do we get the young white male vote back? And they're doing things like, I guess Pete Buttigieg now has a beard and he talks macho. Or now we need to curse. Maybe cursing is what they need. Or was it David Hogg who said all young men want is to be able to get laid? I mean, talk about a low bar and how insulting to young men. Do you think that's all there is to life? I mean, it's even the ones I knew when I was young who were doing that, they never thought that that's all there is. But that's how low the bar is on the Democrat side. So rather than talking about things like that really matter to the American people, like can my kid get a job? Can I get a job? What's inflation looking like? Can I buy food and groceries? Can I put gas in the car to get to work? Can my kid go to school? Is the school destroyed down the street? Can my daughter go to the bathroom without worried about a man being in the bathroom? Can she have a sport? These are the things that people care about. And they're on the wrong side of every single one of them. And so they can't even speak to any of it. So until the party gets rid of its progressive wing, and I don't know how that's going to happen, I just think they're in deep, deep poo-poo, is what it looks like to me.
Good. Let them stay there. I gotta say,
Well spoken. That was even more eloquent than poo poo. What can you say? Yeah, it's just incredible to watch them implode. You know, in every election prior to the last two, party would tack back towards the middle,
yeah,
and they keep doubling and tripling down on insanity. The government's most fundamental and important job is to protect the citizens. Federal government protect us from foreign enemies. Domestic protect us against citizens who are in people in the country who do things that are near do wells, if you will. And you watch what's happening with these riots across the country, where they're literally laying down their arms and letting people destroy the city. And it's obvious to everyone. And to that 25% of the population that wants this stuff, they're the ones who love a camera because they're narcissists by definition. But the rest of the country is looking at that and thinking, I'd like to be able to drive down the freeway and know that it's not going to be jammed up. I like to be able to not know there's going to be bricks thrown through my window. I like people aren't defecating in my front yard. I sort of like getting on the bus and not worried about my neighbor setting me on fire when I'm riding the subway. Um, and I think people are seeing that. And that visceral thing is people want to be safe. And the Democrat Party's proving that they're not about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the heart of everything is just, can I buy a house? Can I have a family? Can I go about my life without being assaulted at every corner? I mean, we take it for granted, but I mean, that's how most of the rest of the world operates is everything is temporary. Everything is something that can be taken from you at any point. And if you're in one of these big liberal cities, that's something you've kind of gotten used to. If you live in Seattle and Portland during 2020 and everything that happened then, it was just the norm to walk downtown and, oh, well, here comes another group of people clad in black, or there's another burned out business. And you kind of grow numb to it. Then you get exposed to, oh, maybe this isn't the norm. You go to somewhere a little eastwards, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, Idaho, and you realize, oh, wow, there are still normal people left. And you realize that the rest of the country is mostly normal people. But it's concentrated in these little areas where crazy lives.
Hey, Reggie, tell them your personal downtown Portland story. I think this is so instructive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so this was right at that time when everyone said there's no Antifa. It's totally made up. It's just something people are using AI to generate on the internet. I had a cousin's wedding, I believe this was 2022 early on. And so it was over in Northeast Portland, went normal. Afterwards, went downtown Portland near Pioneer Square to hang out with some other people after the wedding and just, hang out for a little bit longer. And it wasn't even that late. It was maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock. We were heading back to the parking garage. And sure enough, there goes one guy's running down the street, full tilt, full clad black. That was a little odd. And then all of a sudden you're right in the middle of maybe 100 people, full body armor, got the Antifa flags. All of a sudden there's people throwing tear gas in the street. And it's at that point I realized, oh, I left the ticket to get into the parking garage on my dashboard. Not a great place to be stuck there. But, it's these things where you just take for granted of, you should be able to walk down the street and you shouldn't. There's plenty of places you can't just walk it anywhere at night. Like that's never true anywhere. But that was something where it felt like you would be in Ukraine or Korea or one of these places where things like that just happen. It didn't feel like the United States at the time. And that was the last time I went downtown Portland in the evening, certainly at that point in time. But, crazy things happen, and crazier things tend to happen more often in Portland, Seattle.
And see what he just described is pretty normal down there. That stuff. Now that didn't make the news, right? But that kind of stuff happens all the time. And I remember living in Los Angeles during the whole Rodney King thing when that was going on. And I tell you, that felt better than Portland felt now. And the reason that felt better was because law enforcement actually responded and did something about it. And Bush did call them to federal rallies. And the governor of the state, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was Wilson, did invite them in. And they did do everything they could to quell the riots. It took longer than it should have, but they did. And now we have a situation where, and I remember sitting here watching this was back in 2020, thinking, it's going to be like all the other riots I've lived through, right? They're going to have their day in the sun and riot, and they're going to put it, and they didn't do anything. And that was like one of the first times I realized that we were under, we were having true insurrection is what we were
Yes.
having. Not that nonsense they talk about in January. That this is true insurrection. This is what happened at the history thing again. This is what happened at the end of the Civil War during Reconstruction. The South, i.e., the Democrats, weren't willing to allow rule of law. They weren't willing to allow Black people to vote. The poll taxes, the grandfather laws, the Ku Klux Klan, all of that stuff. Democrats sponsor stuff to keep people from being able to vote, and they're doing the same thing now. Except in this case, they're refusing to enforce law. Think to yourself, how can you have a federal constitution if each state can decide which laws they're going to enforce and which ones they're not going to enforce? That's crazy. That's precisely how we got the Civil War. The South is going to decide. In other words, the Democrats are going to decide. Well, we like these laws, but you know what? We're going to keep slavery anyway. We don't care what the federal government says. You can't run a country like that. Common sense tells you that, and you get the sense that they're literally driving for the same thing to happen again.
Well, they are. And the governor clearly at that time, and even now, our current governor in Oregon, they don't care. And the mayor of Portland doesn't care. They have an agenda. The Democrats have an agenda, and they're going to toe the line and watch that destruction, say, oh, everything's fine. The border is closed. Nobody's coming across. We are fighting the crime, and yet they're not. They're not doing anything. This is why business after business after business is leaving the state of Oregon. Another one yesterday, what was it? It was a big business. I can't think of the name of it, but
Dutch Brothers is one of them. Dutch Brothers.
yeah, but Dutch Brothers, but that technological one, Tektronix.
Oh,
Tektronix.
Yeah.
That is the latest one to announce. There have been many, and then businesses that don't want to, that have said, well, we'll stay in Oregon, but we're moving our headquarters out of Portland because we're tired of having to wake up the homeless person that's right in the doorway or clean up, the defecation that's happened. It's just nasty when you have employees that are going, I don't feel safe coming to work. You have a big problem. Remember all of that happened. And that was under our former governor and the former mayor of Portland. But I don't think much has changed.
Yeah. Well, I think the needle's moving slowly, but I think it is moving. We have to remember it's specific to those certain counties. Again, it's Multnomah County. That's like where the crazies have flocked to the most. But even those people are going to get enough eventually.
It is to those counties, but yet I'm watching what the Democrat legislators and the governor are doing right now in the legislation in the state of Oregon, and they're doubling down. They are tripling down, quite frankly, in that they want to steal the kicker. They want to pass about $2 billion in more taxes in the state of Oregon. And that's why other businesses like Tektronix went, I see the writing on the wall before the legislation even passes. Right. We're leaving.
Yeah. Well, this is probably a great segue. Have you spoken about the whole thing in Eugene, and have we spoken to that yet?
No. So okay. I don't know.
That might be a great segue.
Okay. Well, I don't know what happened in Eugene today, though, Don. I know there was a hearing, Judicial Watch, a court case, and I really can't speak about that. But I will tell you that Judicial Watch is involved in a court case, and I am one of the plaintiffs, yes. But it has to do with cleaning up the voter rolls in the state of Oregon. There was a hearing today. I do not know the outcome of that. And but I can tell you, and our regular audience knows, I've been very involved in the Republican politics in the state of Oregon, going on about 10 years, actually. And calling for, and Don hears me all the time talk about voting, and he's heard me a lot about cleaning up the voter rolls and things like that. Well, that was actually something that I I've had the pleasure of going to three different roundtables at Judicial Watch. And at one of those, the second one, I had an opportunity. I always talked about you have to get involved in politics to people that were attending there. And hey, I asked people at Judicial Watch, are you looking at what's going on in Oregon? This is awful. Our voter rolls are awful, because I knew and know that Judicial Watch has been so active in helping to clean up many other states' voter rolls. So I implored them to come to Oregon. Please come to Oregon. So I was delighted to learn that they were filing a case. And but I don't know the outcome of today. I wish I had an answer, but I don't. So I'm not going to speak for Judicial Watch on behalf of them at all, but I can certainly say that I'm very happy personally. I'm very happy that they're coming into Oregon, because we have a problem, and we have people that shouldn't be on voter rolls. They're not. And then our legislators, the Oregon legislators, pass legislation that bar you from removing people that have moved off the voter rolls. People that have died, can't get them off, get them off the voter rolls. And so here is a link, if I might be able to do something with that. No, I can't. I cannot use it, unfortunately. And but thank you, Marie, for posting that. It's probably something that has to do with that. But until voter rolls get cleaned up, and that's a great segue actually into another story in Iowa. Iowa has banned ranked choice voting and also authorizes the request for proof of citizenship at the polls. And so because of what happened in 2020, more states have changed their election laws and have wised up. We've had more elections, and we have issues with them. And this story is out of the Epic Times, and I'm so glad to see it. It's doing something it's wonderful for Iowa, but I'll tell you, as we have learned through 2020, elections matter, and whatever happens in one state affects us all as a nation. When you have cheating in one state, look at what Arizona did. There's some serious lawsuits happening there. When you have the election manager who's giving the codes to the machines away, and they've learned that the machines are all programmable from afar. And now that person is our new DOJ is going after that and doing more investigations into that to hold these people accountable. But the bottom line is it affects us all as a nation, because we nationally, we elect our president and our vice president. And so if we need to have that ID in voting, no illegals voting, nationwide. We need to have you vote on one day. I totally believe in that. One day, make it a holiday. Everybody go vote. Tomorrow's a holiday. It could have been tomorrow, but it's not.
And I think there might be something about that in the big beautiful bill as well, about about ID for elections, because that's absolutely necessary. That and getting rid of this mail-in stuff. And more states are doing that. And that's going to be a huge impact, because you look at the margins, even in a state like Oregon, it's getting thinner and thinner. And would it go the other direction if it wasn't for what is cheating? I think in this last election, Oregon got down to within 6%, for example, at the presidential, which for here, that's amazing for a state as liberal as this one to be within 6 percentage points. And every single state, even the ones that didn't go Trump moved in that direction. Um, and you wonder how many more would have went had they had decent voting rules and regulations. So that absolutely is worth celebrating.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I was happy to see about Iowa. We'll see, learn more. Hey, I have a couple of good news stories, unless you have something else, Don.
We take good news. We listen to good news.
Okay, okay.
Actually, all of
So
this is good news. It's overtly good news. We're winning bigly.
yes, and I'll tell you, I am not tired of winning bigly at all. Not at all. So I'm going to post a story from the Epic Times that the Supreme Court decision out of Tennessee today. And this is so good news, such good news. And it was a 6-3 decision that the Supreme Court upholds Tennessee's ban on gender affirming care for minors. For me, I know for you, Don, and I'm sure for you, Reggie, this is big, big news. And so Tennessee passed a law that no, we're not going to have gender affirming care for minors, and you're not going to be able to give them hormone blockers or surgery or anything to minors. And of course, another judge says, well, we're not going to go with that. And so it's been through the courts, and now it's the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld and said, yes, you can uphold that. That is valid law, and actually that affects any state of our nation that has passed those such laws as well. So it's not just Tennessee. That is now the law of the land in the United States, that if a state has passed it. Unfortunately, we're here in Oregon that they're doing, like transgender tourism, and it's so sad. If you're an adult, do what you want. Do what you want, but not children.
Yeah, there are so many things wrong with this, or there's so many angles that you can speak to on this whole thing. And one of them is just the lack of study of this. I mean, we don't put drugs on the market unless there's been blind, placebo-controlled, crossover, multi-center trials with thousands of people on them, and they have to be proven to be both safe and efficacious. And here we are rolling out this therapy, if you will, this surgery where there's like virtually no data. I mean, we're talking about this stuff's been done for what, the last 3 or 4 years? We have no idea what this is going to do to people 5, 10, 20, 20. Well, I think we do. But
Don, it was junk science. Junk
yeah,
science.
this complete, it's unbelievable that a physician who took the Hippocratic Oath would do such a thing to anyone, whether you're a minor or not, to anyone. I mean, there's lots of procedures that people who have something mentally wrong with them want done. And it used to be in this country, you couldn't find a physician to do that stuff. So people would leave the country to get it done. And now, because of the decline of the moral compact, which this alludes to it all, everything goes back to morality again, right? We have a group of physicians who've gone through medical school, who don't have any morality. Hippocratic oath's not what it used to be, and they're willing to do this stuff. That's the first thing. The second thing is the incentives are perverse. It's an automatic cash cow. You start doing those surgeries, you'll be getting chemicals and surgical treatments for the rest of your life. So the physicians who are doing this in these hospitals see it as a cash cow. And we've seen where they've been outed by these organizations that bring in secret cameras to their meetings and that sort of thing. And they're doing presentations around how you can really make a lot of money doing this. Because once that patient starts doing that, that's going to be a patient for the next, however long they live, which probably isn't going to be very long, but it's going to be expensive chemicals, expensive drugs, expensive surgical procedures. It's a moneymaker for them. It's a horrendous thing, but the incentives are totally perverse. And then, of course, there's the damage to the human being, which is astronomical. Once they do this, it's irreversible. There's nothing you can do to ever fix it, and their lives are destroyed. And that someone would be willing to do that to another human being is beyond me. But
Yeah.
Yes, so Tennessee's law, it prohibits the healthcare providers from administering puberty blockers or hormones for the purpose of enabling a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex, or treating purported discomfort or distress from a discordance between the minor's sex and asserted identity. It also contains a provision banning surgical procedures, such as like those altering minors' organs. But that portion of the law was not at all in the Supreme Court review of the case. It was in the aforementioned portion there. And so good on Tennessee has prevailed. And we need some more states like that. I think that affects like 25 states.
Yeah.
I believe that decision affects like 25 states.
And you were going to say, Reggie, I thought.
Oh, I was just going to say it's amazing how quickly it went from, if you're a grown person who wants to do something with your own body, then go ahead and do it, to, okay, if you have a kid who wants to do it with parental consent, sure, we can go ahead and give them some pills that are totally reversible. I'm sure there'll be no lasting damage. Do we have long-term studies of that? No, but just like with many other drugs that have been introduced the last couple of years, we have long-term studies that don't exist that will tell you that it won't cause any long-term damage. And so now it's just, if kids want to go and get those drugs themselves without parents even knowing about it, go talk to a school counselor. Sure, here, let's pump you up full of drugs and then get you onto the surgeries in some of these states. So it's just amazing to me how fast that happened in the span of just a couple of years, going from one end of the spectrum all the way to there's just open book, anything's possible.
See, and that's the problem. The conservatives are always nice and always want to see the benefit of the doubt. And we'll give them a little bit here, maybe they'll go away. Wrong. That's not what happens. It's the slippery slope. I remember the conservative Phyllis Schlafly. She's before your time, Reggie, but she was a conservative commentator back in the 80s. And I used to think she was just a big hair older lady who didn't know what she was talking about when she talked about the slippery slope. When I get to the pearly gates, she's the first person I'm going to ask for to apologize. Girlfriend was right. So they start with what do you call it? We're going to make abortion like safe and rare, and now we're out there killing kids after they're born, right? They start with it's okay if, what do you call it? Don't ask, don't tell. Now we got gay marriage, and now we got man boy love club on top of that. So now they're trying to legalize that. There is nothing that they won't start with and go.
Pornography in our schools.
Pornography in the schools, like without the parents even knowing about, not even parent permission, behind your
pornography back. In the libraries, with children having libraries hosting trans dancing, and this type of thing. It's like, oh my word,
teachers,
this is all grooming.
Teachers. Yeah, this is stuff that would have been unheard of. No one even thought of it when we were in high school. And look at where we are now, because
not even 10 years ago.
Yeah,
let alone high school. I don't know when you were in high school, Reggie, but it's a long darn time ago for me.
So ditto that.
10 years ago, Don. We don't have to go back to ancient history,
Yeah, no, that's. But it is. Yeah, you're right. Unbelievable. Well, it seems like a minute ago. We all know it wasn't. but it is crazy. I remember when they first started screaming about the 10 Commandments, and we all rolled over back thinking, what's the big deal? No big deal. But you know what? That was the opening salvo in the war. And when conservatives rolled over and let that slide, and when religious leaders let that slide, it was game on, except one side knew what they were at war and the other side didn't. But that was the beginning. And this is another one of these good news cases to circle back to, because Texas just passed a new law requiring the 10 Commandments be displayed in every public classroom. So, hey, let's go. Let's swing that pendulum right back to where it was, right? There's no reason that shouldn't be the case, because this whole thing, somebody's religion. Well, you know what? Somebody's religion is going to win. I'm sorry. That's just how it is. There's
true.
Yeah, there is no vacuum, and it's either there's the religion to do whatever the hell you want, or the religion of morality or the religion of chaos, or the religion of order. If you want order, then this is how we get order. Back to the fundamentals, back to the basics.
So I just posted another story out of the Epic Times, and I got to see one of the flags get raised. Trump installed today two 100-foot flagpoles, one on the north end, one on the south end of the White House. I only saw one get raised up. He paid for them, each one costing about $50,000. 100-foot flagpole. And I when I first heard that he was going to do this, I went back to, oh yeah, at Mar-a-Lago, he had a go around with West Palm Beach about putting his flagpole up, and they said, no, that's too tall, you can't.
I forgot. About that.
And so he took it down, built a mountain, and then put it on top. He got around their rule, a mound. And so I thought, yeah, at DC, he didn't have any argument. You know what? This is what we're doing.
Mhm.
This is what we're doing. And it's beautiful. The man loves America. And I think about that picture of him, hugging the American flag on a pole. And so now he's got two big, massive 100-foot flagpoles at the White House.
I think that's so awesome. And it goes back to, I think the fundamental thing is, if we are to win, now winning in the short term is a great thing. But winning in the long term is teaching the next generation what that symbol stands for. It's one thing to love the flag. We need to teach people to know, here's why you love the flag. And that's one of the things that I think we've allowed our educational institutions to steal from us. We need to take that back. This is a country, I think maybe the only one in the world, Israel might be the only one, founded on a constitutional republic that actually mentions God in its founding documents. That makes this unique. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all of those things that we've taken for granted. And now we're put in a position where we're not taking them for granted anymore, because the radical left just tried to take it away from us. But the reason they were able to have a good run at success at doing that is because we've not done a good enough job of teaching the young, what those predecessors did and how unique it was. And so that's our job, is to make that happen.
Well, and the good news is, I mean, you're seeing that kind of hunger for a common foundation. You're seeing it, in a return to really religiosity, not just religiousness in general, but actually practicing out the faith. You're seeing that a lot of the fastest growing population of that is people who are 18 to 35. Like, you're seeing that in the younger people. Same thing, I think, for patriotism as well. I think the last couple of decades have really kind of been this malaise of, yeah, it's a good country to be in, but really it's just a good country among other good countries. And, in a few decades, we won't be the top dog anymore, and that's okay. That's kind of going away. You don't really hear that really anymore, certainly not on the Republican side. And you don't even see it on the Democrat side either. No one's really meddling in that middle ground. It really is now either we're going to be and continue to be the strongest country, the greatest country on earth, or we're not. And there's no real middle ground of it's okay to be in the middle. That has dissipated, which I think is one of the greatest things that Trump has done, is just completely destroyed that conversation in general and remade it into a whole new way.
Yeah. And to your point, the fastest growing arm demographic in the Republican Party is the demographic you just mentioned, 18 to 35. And that's the future. And so that is fantastic, because in the other party, there is no future. They're literally telling you there is no future. Can you imagine a world where the United States is number 2 or 3? Behind what? China?
No.
Russia? India? Are you kidding me? Do you want to live in any of those places? There's a reason why we have an immigration problem, because they want to come here.
They're not fighting and dying to go anywhere else.
That is exactly right.
No.
His daughter's at the door.
I recognize that little voice.
You got to love it. She'll be on this podcast in about 10 years.
That's right.
With a flag.
All right. Love it.
All right. Well, we're winding down to about that time. Any closing comments from either of you all here for this?
Well, I would like to say, Reggie, it's wonderful to meet you, and please come back again, and maybe we get him to be a regular here, Don.
I think we might have to do that. Any thoughts for you, Reggie?
Yeah,
Closing?
no, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. I think this is, Danny and I were talking before the podcast started, and these are the kind of conversations that people just don't get in regular life around. That's one of the saddest things the last couple of decades. So these are really important ones. And I love being able to focus not just on the wider world and the wider nation, but right here in our backyard, because that's where the most important battles happen.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, and I read this somewhere. It's a throwback to the way the country ran, say, in the 1800s, 1700s. People think that, so everybody would always meet in bars, and people thought they were just drinking in bars. Well, yeah, they were drinking in bars, but also it's where all the discussion happened. And people had these kinds of discussions all the time. And we're in a world
Yeah.
now where people are so isolated, so one on one, and just with their phone, and just go home and sit in their house, and they don't have, or they just look at a TV screen. And one of the cool things about the whole podcast format is it puts us back to a place where we can go back to the 17th century pub where people talked about the things of the day. And then it doesn't have to be things political, they can be other things as well. But this puts people in a place to share across geographic boundaries as well, which is really cool. I mean, Sunny's like 200 miles away from us, and we can have this great dialogue about the things that are most important to our country. So I think it's one of the places where this technology is a benefit. So let freedom ring.
Let
Amen.
freedom ring.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, captive audience, as usual, for joining us, and we'll wish you all a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
See you, everyone.